She had been telling herself for 3 years that Theron was just an employer. It was the necessary fiction, the one she rehearsed every morning on the subway out of Parkdale, pressed between strangers and half-asleep commuters, cataloguing the professional distance she'd need to maintain before she walked through the glass doors on the 42nd floor. Just an employer, just a paycheck. Just the man whose cold arithmetic kept her from moving back to the cramped apartment in Brampton, where her mother still answered the phone with "I told you," so built into the silence before hello. On the days Theron was cold, which was most days, it was easy enough to believe. He handed files across the desk without looking up. He spoke to her the way a person speaks to a piece of necessary infrastructure, briefly, precisely, never warmly. In 3 years he had not asked her how she was. He had not asked her about her weekend, or her commute, or the cousin's wedding she'd mentioned once in passing. He absorbed information and produced decisions, and the machinery of his empire ran quietly and profitably, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, Veda reconciled the accounts and fixed the problems before he knew they existed, and told herself this was a job, not a life. She was good at telling herself things. She was less good at believing them. The Renfield file came back from legal, she said one Tuesday morning without preamble, setting a folder on the corner of his desk. They flagged the indemnity clause. I've already marked the revision. Theron picked up the folder without looking at her. He read for 30 seconds. He set it back down. Good. That was it. Good. 1 syllable. She had rerouted a potential liability that would have cost him 7 figures. And the man said good the way someone says fine when you tell them lunch is ready. She went back to her desk. She told herself it didn't matter. It mattered in the precise way that things matter when you spend too long in proximity to someone who takes without acknowledging the taking. But Veda had grown up in rooms where she'd been invisible by design, the youngest of 4, the one who didn't play sports or win things, the one who was quiet and good with numbers, and therefore assumed to be fine. She had learned to make herself useful to people who would not appreciate it. She was by now a specialist. Theron paid her well. That was real. That was the thing she returned to when everything else got complicated. She never asked questions she didn't want the answers to. That was the other thing. 3 years in that building, processing ledgers that balanced only when you were willing to look away from certain columns, and she had learned the exact shape of the line between knowing and needing to know. She stayed on the right side of it. She stayed on the right side of a lot of lines. Stuart had sat next to her in a continuing education seminar she'd signed up for, in a moment of what she could only describe as optimism. Corporate ethics, which was, in retrospect, the most absurd course she could have enrolled in given who paid her salary, but she'd needed the hours, and it had a convenient evening time slot. He had the careful, attentive manner of someone who genuinely found the material interesting. He asked follow-up questions. He brought a highlighter. He stayed after to argue politely with the instructor about a case study involving municipal contracts. And the instructor, who had not expected to be argued with politely, clearly didn't know what to do. She'd found it charming. She'd also found it deeply alien. His name was Stuart. He worked in urban planning for the city. He worried about infrastructure and green space, and whether the Portland's development was going to destroy the existing community fabric, and he talked about it the way her colleagues at the office talked about shipment timelines, with stakes, with genuine investment. She'd said yes to coffee mostly out of curiosity. She'd said yes to dinner, mostly because the alternative was another night, eating reheated pasta and watching something she'd already seen. The night of the reservation, she told Theron at 4:30 that she'd be leaving at 5. He was reading something. He looked up. The look lasted exactly 2 seconds, the full aperture look he gave to things that surprised him, before the aperture closed and he filed it away. The Renfield revision. Already with legal, they'll have the signature copy back by morning. She didn't elaborate. She didn't justify. She held his gaze. Fine, he said. He went back to his reading. She packed her bag and left. The Marquette was on King West, the kind of restaurant with exposed brick and candles in short glass holders and a wine list that used the word mineral with complete sincerity. It was not Veda's usual territory. Her usual territory was takeout and a deadline. Stuart had made the reservation. He'd worn a blazer. He'd asked what she preferred before ordering wine and listened to the answer. She'd forgotten, genuinely forgotten, in the way you forget things that fall outside your daily requirements, that people did things like that they asked, that they waited for answers. She ordered the halibut. She drank one full glass of wine without calculating whether she'd need to be sharp later. She laughed at something Stuart said about a city zoning meeting that had devolved into a 40-minute argument about a single tree, and the laugh arrived before she could intercept it. The real kind, the kind that starts in your chest and gets out before you decide to allow it. She felt, for the first time in a long time, like someone who had a life outside a job. The only thing that interrupted it was a prickling at the back of her neck, the particular cold feeling of being watched. She'd been around Theron long enough to absorb some of his vigilance, the way you absorb a language from proximity, involuntarily, permanently. She looked toward the front of the restaurant. The street outside was wet and dark, a smear of headlights and rain. She thought she saw a shape near the awning, large, not moving, dark wool coat. When she looked again, there was nothing but the street. She finished her wine. She told herself it was nothing. The next morning, there was coffee on her desk, her order, the specific order, correct temperature, and a croissant from the French place 2 blocks north that she'd mentioned exactly once, 8 months ago, in a conversation about something else entirely. She stood in the doorway of the office with her coat still on and looked at the croissant for a long moment. Then she hung up her coat and sat down and opened her laptop and did not mention it. "Morning," she said toward Theron's open door. "Morning," he said. Everything was the same. His voice had the same temperature. The office had the same weight of controlled purpose. She processed 3 invoices and a contract amendment and told herself she was imagining the new quality to his attention, the way he seemed, in the periphery, to be tracking her more than usual. She was imagining it. Stuart texted that Friday. "Same time next week?" She said yes. 3 days later, "Running into some work complications, might need to push. I'll keep you posted." Then a silence that stretched past comfortable. Then a brief message, strained at the edges. "Things are complicated in ways I'm not totally on top of yet. I'm sorry, Veda. I'll be in touch when things settle." He worked in urban planning. He ran community consultation workshops. He worried about trees. She frowned at her phone and set it face down. That week, Theron approved 4 budget reallocations without querying a single line item. He had lunch brought in twice, citing back-to-back meetings that had apparently absorbed the noon hour. He sat across from her at the small table in the meeting room and ate in a silence that was, she noticed this, and disliked noticing it, almost easy. She didn't understand why that bothered her. She put it somewhere she didn't look. The billing file arrived the following Thursday. 83 pages, itemized by matter, by partner, by hour. She processed the firm's invoices monthly, reconciling them against the accounts the way she reconciled everything, methodically, without assumptions. She read every line. It was the kind of discipline that had kept Theron out of 2 federal investigations and 1 provincial audit, and she maintained it the way other people maintained gym routines. Not because she loved it, but because the alternative was worse. She found it on page 47. Pelletier Holdings LLC, Asset Research and Preliminary Risk Summary, Municipal Sector. Background, SW, Urban Planning Division. The billing date was a Friday, the Friday after her dinner. She stopped. She read it again. The matter code led to a secondary file. The secondary file led to a corporate registry that she had access to primarily because she had built the system that accessed it, and what she found there terminated, 6 shell companies deep, the way all of Theron's structures terminated, in his name. She sat very still. She pulled Stuart's name from the public record. She pulled the Integrity Commissioner's complaint log, which was accessible because the city published it. She found a complaint filed 9 days ago. She found the audit notice from a subcontractor whose registered address she cross-referenced against a holding company she'd incorporated herself 2 years ago at Theron's instruction. She found the committee. She found the 3 contacts on it. She found the shape of it, the whole systematic, invisible shape of it, and she sat back in her chair and let the fluorescent office hum fill the silence while her hands stayed very still on the keyboard. He had watched her through the glass. He had come home and picked up a phone and methodically taken apart the life of a man who had given her flowers and pulled out her chair. Because she had laughed. Veda printed 1 page. She highlighted a single line in orange, the same orange she used for critical discrepancies, and she got up. Theron was on the phone. He saw her come in and raised 1 finger. He finished the call in under a minute, which told her he'd been waiting for this in the way he waited for everything. Already prepared, already decided. She set the paper on his desk. She sat down without being asked. He looked at it, the orange line, the date. "You were there," she said, "on King West, outside the restaurant." He didn't answer. "You stood in the rain and watched me have dinner." It wasn't a question. She'd moved past questions, and then you came back and made some calls. He was. "Don't tell me about due diligence." Her voice was steady. She'd made a decision, walking from her desk to this office, to stay level. She didn't need volume. She had precision. I built those structures. I know exactly what due diligence looks like. This wasn't that. She held his gaze. "You did this because he touched my hand." Theron looked at her. The scar caught the light. The expression on his face was one she'd never seen before. Not the cold competence, not the controlled authority, but something underneath both of those. Something that looked almost like the recognition of a mistake. "He wasn't right for you," he said, like fact. "You don't get to decide that." The steadiness in her voice held, but barely. "I am not a subsidiary. I am not an asset you manage. I am not something you protect by destroying anyone who gets close to me." She stood. "I quit." The room changed. The pressure in it changed. The way pressure changes before something structural gives way. "Veda, I'll have my credentials revoked by end of business." She picked up the paper from his desk. "I'm taking this copy. If anything comes back on me from any of this, I know what I have access to." She was already at the door when he said her name again, quietly, just the 1 syllable. She didn't stop. The consulting firm in Liberty Village had natural light and a standing desk option, and colleagues who said circle back and touch base with no visible irony. The work was clean. The clients were ordinary. The stakes were nothing more threatening than a quarterly deliverable. She was deeply, profoundly miserable. Not in the way she'd expected to be miserable, not with longing, not with regret, but with a specific restlessness she couldn't name for 2 weeks and then finally could. She missed consequence. She missed the density of it. She missed walking into work, knowing that what she did that day would matter in a way that extended beyond a performance review. She missed the hum of a room that ran on something real. She didn't let herself think about what else she missed. On a Friday evening, 2 weeks and 3 days after she'd left, she sent Stuart a message, short. "I heard things got complicated. I hope it passes." He replied within the hour. "Audit cleared, actually. Whole thing turned out to be a miscommunication. Company's back on track. Weird few weeks, but it resolved itself." She read it 3 times. Resolved itself. She sat on her couch in her quiet apartment, in her clean, safe, ordinary life, and she thought, he fixed it. After she left, Theron had fixed it, without being asked, without it getting him anything. She didn't let that mean what it wanted to mean. Burke called on a Sunday. She'd known Burke for 3 years. Theron's driver, which was a word that meant something different in that world than anywhere else. He was the kind of man who moved through rooms without appearing to enter them. He had always called her Ms., Veda in the mild, formal way of someone who'd decided long ago that respect was a survival strategy. His voice on the phone was rough, off. "I wouldn't call if there was another option," he said. "East End operation got hit. There was a confrontation at a warehouse, a pause. He's in bad shape. He sent the doctor away. He won't let anyone near him." The quiet in the room got very large. "He specifically said not to contact you," Burke said. "I want to be clear about that. But I don't have another play here." She was already standing up. The building was off Eastern Avenue, an old industrial laundry that had been gentrifying slowly toward condominiums for years and hadn't got there yet. She'd processed the lease herself. She knew the side entrance. Burke was in the stairwell. He looked like a man who had run out of ideas and was relieved to hand the problem to someone else. "Second floor," he said. "I'd go with you, but—" "Stay here," Veda said. The stairs were metal. She didn't try to be quiet. He heard her. When she pushed open the door, he was against the far wall, coat gone, down to a shirt soaked dark on the left side, one hand flat against his ribs, a gun on the floor 3 feet away, pushed out of reach. She noticed that. She stored it. He looked up. He looked like a man who had stopped expecting anything, and didn't know what to do with the evidence in front of him. "You cleared the audit," she said. She walked toward him. "Stewart's. You withdrew the complaint. You pulled the subcontractor." His jaw shifted. He didn't deny it. "Why?" she said. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. She crouched in front of him and opened the first aid kit she'd grabbed from Burke's car and started working, because the wound needed tending regardless of what his answer was. "Because you were right," Theron said finally. His voice was rough. "Not from pain, from something that cost him more than pain. And I don't have many lines left that I haven't crossed. That one I could put back." She pressed gauze against the wound. He went rigid, silent. "You watched me through a window," she said. "You stood in the rain." "Yes." "And you went home and made calls." "Yes." "And then you fixed it." "Yes." She worked in silence for a moment. The city was going on outside in its ordinary way, completely unaware. "You could have told me," she said. "You've had 3 years." "I know." He said it like a confession and a verdict at the same time. I don't have the language for it. I have a language for contracts, for leverage, for what things cost." His hand, hanging at his side, turned slightly toward her without quite reaching. "Not for this." Veda secured the bandage. She sat back and looked at him. "If I come back," she said, "you never do anything like that again. You don't interfere with my personal life. You don't run information on anyone I see. You don't use your contacts against anyone in my world." She held his gaze. "And you call Stewart's director personally and recommend him for the Portland's contract, by name, on record." Theron looked at her. Something moved through his expression that she didn't have a word for yet. 30% raise, he said. She blinked. She hadn't got there yet. "I was going to say 28, she said. 30, he said, and I'll make the call Monday morning. She stood up and held out her hand. He looked at it for a long moment, like a man confronting evidence of something he'd given up on, and then he took it. His grip was careful, like something he was afraid to break. She was back at her desk by Monday. The file she'd left current was still current. The chair was at the exact angle she preferred. She didn't ask how that had happened. At 9:40, Theron came out of his office and set a folder on the corner of her desk. She opened it, a written recommendation for Stuart Okafor, specific and genuinely useful, on legitimate corporate letterhead. She read it twice. It was good, detailed, the kind of reference that actually moved things. "The Renfield final copy is back from legal," he said. "I saw it, tab 4 on your desk, flagged where you need to sign." He went back to his office. She allowed herself, in the privacy of her own chest, exactly 3 seconds of something she didn't have a name for yet. Something that would take time to understand. Something she was in no hurry to rush. Theron wasn't a man who apologized. He was a man who corrected his errors with the same cold precision he brought to everything else. and he moved forward without looking at what the error had cost him. He fixed what he'd broken. He held the doors he'd almost closed. She was beginning to understand that this was his language. Imperfect, difficult, expensive, but real. She turned back to her spreadsheet. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And for the first time in 3 years, she didn't tell herself it wasn't anything more than that. Some debts aren't settled in a moment. Some of them are paid out slowly, in small adjustments, in doors held open and calls made on a Monday morning, and 30% raises that arrive without being asked for twice. Veda knew that better than anyone. She was, after all, very good with numbers.